All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to our Ask the Experts session. We are 1 minute before starting time and we're going to let some of the late joiners join. But for those of you who have joined or in the process of joining, you're in the right place. You can see our first slide is up, but we are going to give a few last minute joiners an opportunity to get online. So we will start about 3 minutes after the hour. So until then, the line is going to be silent. So we'll get back to you when the session starts in about 2 or 3 minutes. Bear with us. Thank you. Okay, everyone. Welcome to Gemalto's second Ask the Experts webinar for 2017. My name is Ariella Shoham. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing for Gemalto's Software Monetization Business Unit. I will be hosting this webinar today. Those of you who are new to this program, Ask the Experts is Gemalto's quarterly webinar series where we share industry best practices in the world of software monetization. To continue our series, addressing the 3 global trends we see that are impacting our customers' business, namely digital transformation, servitization and consumerization. Our previous session looked at digital transformation, specifically the industrial IoT, where we heard how Softing Industrial Automation were taking advantage of the IoT and adding a recurring revenue component to their product portfolio. Today, we're moving on to discussing servitization, specifically about introducing new business models to help you monetize in a service-centric environment. With us today to present to you is Dale Hopkinson, who is a Senior Consultant at Gemalto. Hi, Dale.
Hi, Ariella. Hi, everyone.
Before we start, I just want to draw your attention to the questions chat window on the webinar control panel. You're all muted, but please feel free to submit your questions anytime throughout the webinar. And then I can submit them directly to Dale. Both Dale and I can communicate with each other, and so I can share the questions as they come up and as they adapt to the topic, or we can keep them to the end. Let's see how we go. All right, we're ready to begin. Over to you, Dale.
Yep, thanks, Ariella. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks again for joining us in our series. As Ariella mentioned, so today we'll kind of talk about one of the trends we see, the servitization, which is really just going from the traditional manufacturing or offering a device or perpetual software to now tacking on additional software and services and looking for new ways to drive value and revenue out of that. So that's a quick agenda for today. So we'll go through a bit of servitization, kind of reorient, and maybe even sharing new information with some people who may be new to the concept, looking at what it, where it currently is in the industry, what are the drivers and even the challenges and benefits of doing it, and ultimately how we evolve the business models around that. We'll look at a few key models that we typically see when we're talking to people who are evolving or who have evolved and continue to see great impacts from that. And then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways, of course, Q&A. So Ariella and I would like to be as interactive as we can with the group on the phone. So if there are questions that sort of they coincide with the timing of some content I'm delivering, I have no problem taking a pause to address the questions. And if we don't, rest assured we'll get to those questions at the end. All right, so once again, thanks for joining, and let's get started. So in building this presentation and sort of how we present a lot of what we see these days, I kind of thought about, so I didn't want to put up the typical Industry 4.0 slide. We've been to many of the webinars or the industry events, and we see everyone has a slide or content on that, right? And speaking to many of our customers, the number one thing that sort of repeats is this whole thing of value. And I think a lot of customers they're transforming and evolving their offering, be it software services or what their hardware can do at some times. It really comes down to the value. What we see, this quote by Peter Drucker, of course, one of the founding fathers, of course, marketing and business management strategies. He says, what a customer buys and considers value is never the product, right? It's always what the product or service does for that particular customer that they're willing to pay for. And with that mindset, it's really that premise that sort of drives this whole concept of servitization, which again is moving from the traditional, then you see the production things in machinery. It's typically when we hear that term servitization, it resounds around manufacturing and in automation industry, but the entire process as far as moving from whether it's software and services to data to an ecosystem, etc., it's the same exact process for even just the enterprise software group, right? But we see that the entire concept is moving from some piece of manufacturing equipment or software where traditionally you would sell that just one way, right? Now looking for iterations where you can drive services and or software on that, extending the responsibilities and capabilities of only the product alone, and then ultimately, having things interact, right? We have the proliferation of connectivity now, industrial IoT and other avenues, cloud, systems, etc. How do you make now, those devices or that infrastructure smart, be it if it's speaking to a cloud to give you as a vendor some data, or if it's speaking to another product or a piece of equipment for your end customer to drive more value for them. So it really becomes now moving as a service provider, right? You're no longer just providing a product or equipment, but you're providing now everything around that to support and ultimately for you drive greater revenue also. So that's a quick example. This again, this thing of servitization, it's not necessarily new. It's been around quite possibly since, been around the 1980s. It was initially made popular by Rolls-Royce. They of course had the power by the hour, no longer just selling the jet engines, but selling the benefit of that. And looking at this, one of the interesting ones to me is actually Michelin. We work with a group, Simon Kutcher, who does pricing, who was heavily involved in Michelin. Years ago they created a tire that had 20% more road life. But of course they brought it into the execs and they said, well, we can't sell this thing for 20% more. So they figured out a way to sell the benefit of the tire, not just the tire itself. And it was interesting. I guess I'm kind of interested in Michelin. I just changed my tires not too long ago, right? But for this company, it's actually interesting. They see, by 2020, they're looking to drive about $2.27 billion of revenue from their services and solutions unit, which in 2015 that was just under $1 billion. And they really pride themselves on innovation, right? One of the new things they have is called a TWEEL, T-W-E-E-L. It's one of the first commercially airless tires. It actually was around since 2005, and they invented it then, but other companies have also developed prototypes. But Michelin was the first to commercialize and monetize that. And their president and chairman in North America says, their customers have such a huge problem with flat tires that the downtime with the flat tires is so great that finding a solution is almost priceless. And then he goes on to quote, he says, our customers don't really buy tires. What they really want to do is maintain the mobility of their devices. So for that particular product that they've innovated, it's initially for the commercial, sort of the industrial machines, right? Industrial vehicles. It's very, very costly. Would be costly for a consumer at this point in time. One tire is like between $1,000 to $2,000, depending on the type of tractor or equipment is going on. But it's interesting that he says, again, the whole point of servitization is driving value, as you just saw in that quote, right? But they're looking at this thing of they're not providing tires, they're providing a service to help their customers maintain mobility of their vehicles. And of course, if you're around the industrial automation or any group that provides machinery, the plight of downtime, right? So no unplanned downtime is as close as you can get to that. Honestly, as you said, he's not joking. It's a price of solutions. Your customers will pay just about anything to prevent no unplanned downtime, which really, again, leads into some of the core market drivers of this servitization, customer demand. Right? What is the customer demanding in either an outcome or value-based pricing or usage-based pricing, etc. But it really helps to differentiate your product and offering, which of course we'll go into in this presentation. But helping you to enter maybe even low-cost markets, right, or create new markets. But it's a way to differentiate yourself in sort of this world where hardware is commoditized, right? It's really difficult to compete on hardware as it used to be. Not impossible, but depending on what your solution set is, though, of course, the margins there is more the more benefit that you have to transform into, providing more software and services and monetizing that. Technology or software is really
Wait, Dale.
what's making servitization a practical reality. Yeah, is there a question?
There was an audio problem, and we missed your previous sort of the conclusion from the previous slide. So can you go back? Yeah. So maybe just at that conclusion, we lost audio throughout, and also I think one of the questions that popped up before we lost audio was a question about the specific industries where we see that the servitization has already started to play a part. And I think you talked about that when you showed the examples, right? The manufacturing companies or the industrial automation companies, they seem to be the ones that are embracing this. And so maybe put that in context when you talk about these market drivers, just for 2 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. No, and yeah, great question, by the way. Yeah, so no, I was just saying with this slide, as with technology, and the next slide goes into more depth with that. These are the sort of the core 4 things. There are other minor drivers, but as we meet with our customers and industry analysts, these are the 4 core things that help or really drive this whole transformation to servitization, right? Wanting to differentiate your product and service in a highly commoditized world if you're based off hardware only, right? Of course, by doing that, you're generating new streams of revenue, which, of course, if things are managed properly, you're affecting bottom line in a positive way. Really, again, just based off the example of Michelin, meeting the customer demand, right? Where then we'll go into more of the pricing demand a little bit, but there's the demand for value, right? How you have that customer around it with the lifetime value of that customer as far as providing product and software and services, etc. And ultimately, technology is driving that. So to the question of, what industries are we sort of seeing, adopting this a bit, at an accelerated rate? I would say, yeah, as Ariella mentioned, the manufacturing and automation, right? I think, and one of the things there is basically because of technology, when you have things like industrial IoT, there's no longer this big fear of, still a concern, but it's no longer such a big fear where you don't want to connect, robots on a plant floor or machinery on a plant floor, because they understand by connecting you can drive greater value, right? I was meeting with a robotics company a while ago. They sell robots that does the actual picks for e-commerce. So when you buy something with e-commerce, typically a robot goes, gets what you ordered and goes to the shelf and picks and pulls those things. They're selling it there, and they said they don't want to be known as a robot company. They want to be known as a service provider. And what they do is their robots can connect via the internet, and they automatically push down things like break fixes to the robots, as well as increasing the capacity of the robots. So during high times, so think like Black Friday and Cyber Monday, when there's much more ordering going on, they can automatically push down capacity or new code to the robot to move quicker, right, or do more picks. So those are the kinds of things in the industries we're seeing that sort of advancing a bit further. But as we'll go through, everyone is thinking about this or has something committed roadmap to drive this, right? Yep. So, which again, just building off the last point there, where technology, mainly software, is making sort of this transition, much more real and much more easy to handle, right? Whether it's software that's being used by the device to speak to cloud services or different applications to give data. This is sort of the linchpin here, right? So finding a way to monetize the software and allow the software to drive the differentiation opposed to hardware. We work with a company, this is public information, so Trimble Navigation, they have a particular mountain GPS, antenna. Years before, they would have multiple antennas according to how you want to measure, right? So one antenna can measure within a millimeter, etc. Another one can get a very precise measurement. But now they actually change those different measurements based off software, so they can cut costs and have one antenna provided, and they can immediately and instantaneously turn on and off the different levels of measurement, right? Because you may have a project where that project doesn't require you to have a very precise measurement. You don't need the pinpoint accuracy. So you can subscribe to a lower tier for that particular project. So software is doing these things, right, making this a big reality. And again, how you leverage the software, if it's just based on the device or cloud service, right, comes down to where you see the value and where you want to provide value for your customers. But this is the sort of as an ecosystem approach, right, the places where you can leverage software and ideally monetize on every level, right? We see a lot of companies, while they may have their primary software they sell to their customer is based off the device and the software, they may also collect some data where they sell to adjacent verticals, right? So that's not far. So again, just opening up new streams of revenue for you. And as I mentioned, again, while it's been around for the whole premise of servitization and changing the business model to be based more closely, more aligned to the value you're providing to the customer. There were some challenges, and we'll go through some of that before, but where we see the increase of the transformation taking place, again, based off of software and based off of technology and connectivity. But there's about, as we work with some analysts
Dale,
to really understand a bit of the market. Yes?
Sorry, I want to jump in because I want to just provide a few more words about this research, if it's okay with you.
Yeah, please.
Vance & Bourne is a third party. Gemalto used to conduct research. We interviewed specifically manufacturers, and we asked them these questions, right? How have you, are you already offering or in the process of offering more service-centric, offerings to the market? And 84% already said that they're already offering or in the process, right, of transforming their business to more software-centric services. We also asked questions about software licensing, and again, 51% have already introduced licensing of software, and 41% are already implementing flexible pricing models. So what this basically means, just to further reinforce what you said until now, is that this is already here. So anyone in the audience or companies that we talk to, this is a proof point that these are the actual changes that their fellow competitors are already going through, and that, again, this is a sort of a bit of a wake-up call for those who haven't started, because this is happening everywhere. So, yeah, I'll hand back to you, Dale.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and this is, just from me personally, every customer I visit, right, it's either something that is committed on roadmap that we're working through implementations, or it's something that is the next thing to be done, right? Again, I think we all know, the point of hardware is commoditized, right? It's not just so much the commoditization of hardware. It's that you don't really drive differentiation based on hardware anymore, right? So where you can differentiate and better compete now is on the level of software and services, as you look to provide software services, maybe some data, and playing in an ecosystem, right? Those are the places now where you can evolve. And of course, with that, this hardware is going to be difficult. Again, not impossible depending on what vertical you're in, but very difficult to differentiate based off the hardware, which is why, again, this, as Ariella was mentioning with the data and the survey, why behind these numbers essentially. But of course, nothing good is ever really easy, right? There are some barriers to this servitization, and sort of when we work with customers who have their own consultants, or we're working with customers to sort of help them get started, or wherever they are in this process. Here are the core things that we typically see as sort of the difficult hurdles to clear, right, to effectively servitize. Again, I did mention technology, and technology is usually the short pole of the process. While critical, a lot of times we like to jump and gravitate toward the technology. But looking at this, from the macro view, sort of the business problem, right? It really comes down to reinventing the business, right? I mean, you're shifting strategy and changing business models. Look at a company like GE years ago. I mean, they would be just the hardware and the energy company, right, and the conglomerate. Now the former CEO, one of the primary visions is to be by 2020 to be one of the top 10 software companies, right? Because they understand that software is where the transformation, the value is going to come, and in that, I mean, he's mentioned he's had to have an organizational change, and that may have been learning new skills or bringing people on board to augment the team that, have the service provider mindset, right, and not just stuck on sort of the product structure and feature structure, etc. Learning how to adapt to the market to provide, that value. It really, again, ultimately, it's an investment. It's a long-term transformation, right? So I mean, companies have to be able to have the resource on hand to go through that, right? And once you can clear those things, I mean, again, the technology where Gemalto really comes in, helping companies to monetize and change business models, and whether it's on the software, the service level, usage-based, outcome-based pricing, etc. That's the level. Again, it's critical because you have to look at as you scale. Existing systems may not be able to scale with you or scale for the future, right? Which is again, where we come in and where we really drive a lot of that change there and a lot of the value there. And some of the methodology, to sort of expose you to some of this, when we do consulting engagements, etc. Yes?
Sorry, before you go into this, there's a question about what about software companies? So we talk a lot about manufacturers, right? So can we talk a bit about software companies as well? And I think it's actually a good segue into this slide because these are strategic
absolutely.
that are relevant also for software companies, right? So maybe sort of just address that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure, and great point. I mean, and sometimes, most times when we look at it from from our level to us, whether it's an automation or device vendor to software company, that's somewhat irrelevant when you get down to this approach in the technology side, right? You're still looking to monetize software services, maybe data, etc. But no, specifically for software companies, I think a lot of software companies now are really on the moving away from perpetual and even just base subscription, right? They want to get to more usage and outcome-based pricing, and of course driving customer experience, right? So when you look at this sort of approach, the shift becomes shifting from product focus or just a software focus to now the customer focus, right? How does the customer interact with the software? What is the UX, the UI experience like, right? What do they have available? How do you sort of have tiered pricing, etc., or different offerings to meet different markets? The value proposition, again, moves from just innovating the technology and having new features and new releases to, again, that customer experience. What's the experience like when a customer has to upgrade? Can they run both versions at the same time? Do they need to? Is it seamless, right, etc.? And then, of course, in the revenue model, I mean, again, directly to any software, if it's hardware and software, software only, the revenue model moving from just transaction to recurring, right? And that was the first big shift in software, moving from the perpetual to subscription. Now I'd say a lot of software is now from subscription to pay-per-use or outcome-based pricing, right? Which is, again, another customer benefit there because customers are getting the ability to pay for what they use, right, opposed to just buying the software outright or buying service outright. So no, I think probably one of the only or slight differences with software, the enterprise software, to maybe the device vendors and automation machinery, etc., is that they're going to the same path as software did, probably years ago at a much slower rate, right? They're now looking to adopt a lot of the different models and ecosystems, whereas software, we're already there, right? I mean, think of if you had software and hardware at some point in time, chances are now you only have you have maybe an offering that has only software, where you run now in someone else's environment, virtualized environment or cloud, private cloud, public cloud, etc. Right? So while we may have already broached those things, pure software is still dealing with or looking at shifting to be more service-centric, augmenting the software with more services that's customer appropriate to drive customer experience, looking at the recurring value, etc. So again, from our standpoint, from our eyes, from the technology shift and the benefits, and that's pretty much the same from both software. But of course, software, pure software vendors, have less worry about the moving pieces that have to go with all the hardware pieces, right? And of course, some of the benefits I kind of alluded to. So again, regardless of if it's hardware company, device vendor, or software, some of the benefits are really all the same, right? Looking at now a more service-centric approach, you go from transactional to customer value, customer lifetime value, right? So how do you increase customer retention? How do you go from just selling the software and knowing maybe who has installed and configured to now knowing how that software and service is actually being used, right? So you put yourself now in this continuous learning. You're learning how your offering is being used from your customers, so you can take that and reiterate it, to drive greater value, right? You can optimize your software and services from that continuous learning. So that's one key thing with it, especially software only, is now how do you begin to get insight and actionable analytics from the usage of your software once you sold and deploy it. Those are one of the key things we really help with customers to figure out, our customers to figure out. And of course, stable and predictable revenue, right? I mean, you get the ability to impact product release cycle again by this continuous learning and understanding what the market needs and wants. You get to better plan roadmap and commit to roadmap, etc., and execute on roadmap. Then ultimately competitive, right? You may be able to attract or expand to new markets, where new markets may require to skim back the value add and skim back the service and software that, to bundle differently, right? You can do those things without necessarily re-engineering software once again. Just seeing what that market needs and scaling back to that particular market. And dealing with low-cost competition, right? I mean, sometimes the low-cost competition is not the solution is not good enough, or it's too good, it's too overbearing, right? They may perceive it to do too many things than what they need. You can bundle it differently, where they don't even see those options, and now you have those different options where you once had for the enterprise, group. You can have those a different add-on now, right? So very common things that we see with our customers. But again, key benefits across the board, whether it's device manufacturing base or just pure software companies. So I want to get into a bit of the key models that we see. And again, we have machinery here. Don't be too concerned. It's not just machine and device. Focus is just that word itself, servitization, usually triggers, the notion of devices. But again, these things I'll go through the models as well as sort of how it's done and what's being done today. These pertain really around the software piece of that device or that machinery, right? How the software is being leveraged to drive these models and to give companies these particular benefits. So of course, on the left-hand side, the very basic model is, again, there's some level of product and service, right? So you've moved from a perpetual kind of license for that software or hardware. Some people may say the hardware came along for the ride, software came for the ride. Then now you're looking at you're monetizing service level agreements on top of that, right? Or you have your SLA for cloud or uptime or however you do that. But not just that, but you have upgrades of software, right? How do you monetize the upgrades or updates, right? Then for the hardware people, of course, you have trainings and repairs, etc. But for software, it becomes, at what point is there a paid upgrade? When we deal with pure software companies, and they're moving their model from perpetual, this is one of the biggest challenges to figure out, is how and when will you charge for the upgrade? Because typically you had perpetual license and you got everything, right? So now that you've identified that new stream of revenue and upgrades can drive revenue, how do you do that, right? How do you track that? How do you record that? How do you enable the sales team to have that information, etc. Right? So those are all things on the software side. Again, from the business model. One of the beyond the subscription where it's just a flat rate is you have this usage and consumption, right? Where if you think about the metering, right, you have this subscription, and within the subscription, you're allowed to work up to X capacity, and you want to track that capacity to make sure the consumption is not over. Or if you allow the overage, you're tracking that overage, like the cell phones, right? You're tracking the overage and you're billing based off that. So again, another core things, and that of course you can make as automated as you need it to be. We can talk and work through some of that. And one of the new sort of models that we're seeing as evolving is not just the consumption or usage, not just paying me for what I've used in the solution, but now sort of extracting value from my value in a way, right? So if the outcome of that contract was, I use your robot, your robotics, such as using a particular software that enabled me to do something quicker, right? And because I did something quicker, I gain more money, right? You're extracting sort of revenue based off my value. To give an example, again, we have companies who deal with agriculture, and they have some really, really cool and intricate agricultural software where These big, heavy tractors and these devices can drive around the the field, and the software has tons of sensors on the device and software. And the software is sort of checking the ground, right, to say, okay, this is the optimal ground, right, and at this ground, this is the optimal depth to plant the seed. And by using that, you plant at this optimal depth, you increase your, the harvest, 1.5x, right? So that 1.5x translated to some amount of dollars, you can now get something based on that some amount of dollars because your software gave that additional value to, let the provider know where to plant, right? That's where the outcome base is going. And again, the more software world is, I'm using this particular software to have me to do something quicker, right, or to automate some kind of functionality. That automation save me headcount or something like that, right? And you can, bill, depending on how your structure is, either bill or get, a percentage of that. So there's many different variations of outcome, but I definitely think this is one of the places where a lot of people are beginning to explore more, right? And again, goes back to that whole point of Michelin. They're not providing the product; they're providing what the product is doing for the customer, right? And that's really their value add, and their customers understand that, and they negotiate based off of that value. So sort of more in depth of where I went through. Again, pay-per-use. When you look at the pay-per-use, that typically comes down to on the software level. Usually beyond the software, there's some kind of diagnostics, right? That's usually a separate model where you can pay per use. You're counting or you're metering how many times or how long this diagnostic did something or saved you from something, right? But again, from the more traditional sense, paying per use for the repairs and maintenance and consumables, right? But again, for the software, pure software, enterprise software group now, upgrades. Right? And what is it, a point release or a major release? How do you look at that, right? But every time that upgrade occurs, that's another pay-per-use kind of model for this particular revenue stream, right? Where again, usage base is again more of the value base of the performance, right? So the value that your customer gets out of using your solution, be it software only or a couple of software and hardware, right? And of course, when you look at things like for the hardware guys, when you move to these particular models, replacing of equipment becomes much easier, right? Because companies are not necessarily paying for that equipment. They're paying for the benefit of that equipment, which of course, it affects all the intangible things, right? There's greater uptime, greater use of machinery, greater effectiveness, etc. All that's that part is driven by contracts, of course, but the bottom pieces, their usage and the integrated service, usually driven by technology. More lines of monetization technology of what Gemalto provides and where we sort of fit in to help customers solve many of those problems there. And so sort of the shift, one of the big things actually interesting when I speak about this, typical manufacturers, right? Again, and when the question was asked, what group, or is there any kind of verticals we see accelerating a bit more in this trend? Definitely manufacturers. We have companies like, KUKA's out there, the robotics guys. They want to do things like manufacturing as a service, where their companies and their customers rather can instantaneously spin up new capacity or add new machinery to the floor, right? Or taking existing machinery and turning on capacity. Those are the kinds of things that we've been doing in software already, right? Especially cloud services. I can have the bronze model and I can purchase and immediately have now the platinum or the enterprise build, right? So provisioning and turning things on based off the existing installation and not necessarily having to install something else, which is, if you're not doing that in the software world today, when you think about the slide I had up before, shifting from customer experience, it's a much easier customer experience if you can have one version of your software and you can monetize that, right? You can turn things on and off inside that software. So I can have one installation. I can go from evaluation copy to basic copy to enterprise copy simply by provisioning something, whether it's cloud-based or traditional on-premise license, right? That depends, but it's a much easier user experience opposed to having to download another installer and install that that new version on top of the old one, right? Which can be conflicting, but just gives the user more things to do. Then there's a company, Liquid Robotics. It's very interesting what they're doing. So they actually created, a wave, not a wave, I'm thinking about my upcoming vacation, a wave glider that collects and communicates real-time ocean data, right? But they call themselves an ocean data service provider. So they actually have a subscription to their data services, starting at $2,000 a day, right? And their customers are on defense and oil and gas and commercial and science. So what they're doing is, so they have these wave gliders that's around the ocean and collecting different data points and different temperatures and many different other elements. And that saves their customers, the whole trip of, having to put together a crew and charter a boat and to go out and to collect the data. When they have this data already collected, you can subscribe to the level of data you need, and you can get right down to the research, right? Whether that's from the oil companies knowing where's the best place to drill, or science knowing what's going on with the, with the earth, etc. So again, the value they're providing is you can get straight to the data without having to do all the other things. And it really comes down to, again, both of these companies, how they're packaging and bundling their service. And same thing for software, right? How you package and bundle your service to meet key market needs and offer differentiation between your packaging and your pricing model. Then another one of the keys, so this is more specific to machinery and robots. One of the things we see, and that's going to be greatly enhanced, is sort of this thing of preventive maintenance, right? So preventive maintenance is where there is required some kind of lockout period to do something to the machine, while predictive maintenance is something that you can update real time while the machine is running. So slight differences for those who are not aware. But in this thing of preventive maintenance, a few things happen. Well, one, especially with the proliferation of robotics and maybe machine learning and AI that's coming, undoubtedly there's going to be some litigation and some laws around this, right? Actually, today, Department of Labor, I believe it's Department of Labor, they actually have some lockout period, right, that's required by these machines. So what we're starting to see in the automation and manufacturing space is there's now going to be this enforcement of this particular maintenance period, right? And to kind of give you insight what this would look like, so let's look at a basic 3D printer, right? Let's say there's a UV lamp in a 3D printer, and let's say it can go up to 10,000 hours, right, before the lockout period. So at some point in time, let's say 5,000 hours, it would give a warning to the operator, hey, you're at the halfway point, right? Then at 7,500 hours, it gives another warning, hey, you're at the 25, you have 25% capacity or hours left or something like that. Then if there's no maintenance done or no maintenance validation, whatever process that has to happen, it could be as simple as the light being changed, right, in this instance. But whatever process has to be done, if it goes up to that maximum period, the software is going to stop working, right? And it is going to have to by law, because if that goes past the preventive maintenance period without that maintenance, bad things can happen, which can drive larger issues, right? So that's sort of the premise of what this preventative maintenance is doing and where it's going. So there must be some kind of lockout period, and now again, that's going to begin to be enforced by software. The software is going to track something, right? Whether it's the number of times that machine did something or how long that machine is running. Ultimately, I mean, this is for production efficiencies, and this happens today, right? It's just not enforced, right? Most companies know at a certain point we should check, again, think of a very basic example as your car. At a certain point, you should check the gas, right, or change the fuel. If you don't do that, chances are you probably still can operate, but maybe you're not operating to the max efficiency as you can, right? Which, again, I mentioned this is something that's going to be enforced. And not only that, but companies are now looking at enforcing this to also change only with OEM parts, right? I mean, of course, aftermarket parts are cheaper. And the usual thing is, once you're inside the contract, you'll use the OEM parts not to avoid the contract. But once you're outside of maintenance contract, OEM parts are more expensive, you'll go aftermarket, right? But the companies with this particular procedures now, driving a new form of revenue, they're looking to actually enforce now that OEM parts must be the one to, if there needs to be replacement, or OEM partner or OEM certified partner must be the one to perform the actual maintenance, right, to ensure the machine lifespan. So that, again, it's really just about ensuring the machine lifespan and preventing things from going wrong before it happens. This, again, is more specific to automation, manufacturing, machinery group. But for them, they're looking now at taking this piece of law and driving new recurring revenue out of that, right? And that's all being driven by the software. The software is tracking how long something is running or how many times, whatever that metric for the maintenance is, the software itself is tracking that, and the software is taking an action based off of that. But ultimately, it's in the benefit of the end customer, right? I mean, preventative, we all know preventive maintenance is usually cheaper and quicker and easier before you need to do a break fix, right? Getting a new part there and production halted overnight, etc. You can plan that lockout period, and you can do the proper enforcement or the proper maintenance action at that particular time.
Dale, before you go on, can you just go back to the preventive maintenance? So one of the questions, and I think you addressed it in the example you gave, but maybe you can give some more examples from that event that you attended and presented that. The question is, which industries or verticals are feasible, I guess, for predictive maintenance? Again, from your experience and maybe from what you heard at that event, is there like a specific industry where preventive maintenance is going to make more sense?
Yeah, well, I think so. From what I've been sort of following and people I'm connecting to, this is just those who are first tied to the laws, right? So there's laws right now that manufacturing, and I forget the actual specification, but it's more manufacturing shops. Those who have big machinery, they must have some preventive maintenance, right? We can make sure you get that actual laws and litigation about that. But it's right now manufacturing and those with robots, right? I think, and I forget how the U.S. law classifies the robots as of now, but things like robotic arms and those, if you think about, the moving unmanned components on the manufacturing floors, those are the things that have to be checked, right? Because if that is not checked, and let's say, something happens to that robot now can, drive the wrong way, or it can lose a sensor and it can drive into another robot, and that, right? And so many different things can happen. So that's one of the main things right now. And they, of course, have the biggest incentive to do that, because if they don't, they can be fined, right? So it's starting from there. But then other companies are, in sort of the, so that's manufacturing robots, but there's companies in the health, not health yet, but the food space, right? Food production. So they're looking at things like, well, we need to make sure that, the things like the thermostats are very accurate, right? Because if it's 0.1 degree higher or lower, that can mean that the milk that goes out is going to spoil not on the expiration date, but 2 or 3 days earlier, right? So while I don't think they're enforced by law yet, simply for brand management and their own safety and safety of their products, they're also doing things like that right now. So those are, to my knowledge, and that's who I've been connected close to, those two that are really accelerating to look at this preventative maintenance. But again, they're looking at it from both sides, right? The health and safety as well as the revenue. But there are other companies that's going to follow, I think, because they're probably more closer to health, safety, and law, that they're sort of abiding by it a bit more rigorously first.
Thanks, Dale. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, then probably one of this is the third trend that we're tending to see now, and this is again not too new with pure software only, but I think software we can do a little better here also. But it's sort of this relicensing thing, right? So here's the sort of the setup. Company buys hardware and software, right? Whatever that hardware and software is in this example. They resell that stuff, the hardware and software, to a secondary company, because this company A can afford to buy a new version or upgrade, right? So they resell that to company B. Company B now has hardware and software at a premium, at a discount. Now they can run that hardware and software. Now the problem is that most likely voided any agreements, right? Most agreements are non-transferable. But the point is that this new customer, right, doesn't have a relationship. So what you miss out on is really some revenue and customer relationship, right? So the primary vendor, an OEM in this case, they don't have insight into that customer, who they're supporting, how their things are being used, if it's being used against specs according to what the particular software is, and I'll give you sort of a graphic into what that looks like. Right. So what we see here is, again, keying off of software. So again, if someone sells hardware, there's no way to really stop that, right? But you can stop the software from working on that hardware. right? So the software license itself also becomes non-transferable as well as a service agreement. So where the chance for revenue becomes now is, and I had Cisco up because Cisco's doing this. This is again public information on their website. They have a few different tiers of secondary ownership, right? So for their secondary owner, if so there's a few things. So one, secondary owner must pay the same exact price for the software license for the software to work on that device. That's one. Then the secondary owner also has an option. If they want to pay a fee for sort of inspection and certification, they can. And what that will get them is they get a full warranty as if they were the primary customer, right? The primary purchaser. If they want to forego the warranty service, that's fine. That's up to them. But Cisco still captures revenue from the software license sale. And then they also capture the customer benefit, right? So the customer gets the benefit of being an official customer of that particular company. In the case of software, again, some software does this today, where if you buy a software, you can't really transfer the license key that comes with the software. Some technologies, you can maybe bypass that if it's not a secure technology, right? But again, this is something that software has been doing for a while, but I think, again, as we look at it, this could be another key point for revenue also for software companies, a place to look at how that's actually enforced, right? Because sometimes you have things on paper which is not transferable, but you don't really enforce it, right? So I know a lot of software companies don't actually enforce this. So if the software is resold with the same license key, sometimes it works, right? So with the software-only companies, you can look at ways, and we fit in right here with our technology to validate and to make sure if the software is resold, that same key that was belonging to customer A does not work for customer B, and they have to purchase a new license key from you in order to have that software working. And again, for you, you capture new revenue, but for the customers, they capture the full value of being your customer, right? They get the warranty, the support, and services that you support them with, right? So again, that's benefits for both customer and company.
Wait, just one more question before we close the session.
Yes.
Okay, so there's a question about software relicensing. Do you see customers starting to hack software on these machines in response to software relicensing? Like maybe you have an example of, or do you know of something like this?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, and there's secondary market and gray market, right? So this, while it does protect the company, this also does open, an avenue for malicious things to happen, right? So that is true. I don't know if there's any correlation with increase and decrease, so I don't know if this is happening much more because of now this is being enforced. So I just don't know. But with of course the hacking piece, that's something the primary the company, the OEM, would have to think about and take into account to begin with, right? And again, we help there. So there's many different ways to look at software validation and protecting software, not only based off the key. I think if it was something that was only based off a license key, given time and resources, you can hack anything, right? So I don't know. I don't know if there's any increase, but of course, I mean, coming from the security world and being in security for a long time, that is an incentive for someone who is motivated to try to bypass that. But again, there's many different ways that you can, sort of fight off those attacks, right, up front in the initial implementation. And if that's of a concern, I would say, for sure, connect with us and we can talk to a bit more in depth of your unique situation.
Thank you, Dale.
Yeah, good question. Good question. Yeah, and just sort of key takeaways before we sort of go through all the Q&A that we may have. So again, it really comes down to business transformation, right? I mean, we can spend another hour and talk to companies that didn't transform and evolve, that's no longer around, right? I think servitization is one of those avenues where, again, we saw between software and technology, mainly connectivity, is driving the ability now to provide things differently, or new things, or things in the way that your customers want to consume it, right? Really helping it to redefine traditional business models, whether it's traditional software perpetual sales or subscription or manufacturing models, right? Decoupling services, bundling things differently for different markets. Ultimately, it gives you the ability to drive new revenue and predictable revenue, right? And then competing, when I was with the manufacturing, industry a while ago, one of the things is competitive advantage and moving into smaller markets, right? A lot of them, they're priced out of mid-sized markets just because it can't fit. But they're looking at, okay, how do we not sell the hardware, and how do we maybe lease the hardware, or you may have a one-time payment for hardware that's significantly less, and drive revenue based out of software, drive revenue based out of outcome, right? And augmenting that with great customer experience and services. So these are the three core things. Again, there are many different benefits, but from the customers we speak with, these are the three core things they look as key takeaways and key benefits for them. So that's the end of my presentation for today. But of course, as many Q&A questions we can have in this time, more than glad to field questions.
Thank you, Dale. So we're coming up to the hour, and we actually addressed them interactively throughout, so we're pretty good. And if there are any other questions, then everyone has my email in the invitation. Feel free to contact us or one of your sales representatives, and we'll be happy to get back to you with additional information. So thank you everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Dale. It was a very interesting session. I enjoyed it very much. And until our next Ask the Experts webinar, everyone have a good morning, afternoon, and evening, and goodbye.
Thanks everyone. Take care. Speak soon.